The deed was in my hand, one page, my name at the top, the address in the middle, and my sister Renata Floriano's dream venue listed as the property mine legally, irrevocably, for the next 5 years, leased exclusively to every competitor she had ever envied. I remember the exact weight of that paper. I remember how my attorney, Claudia Voss, slid it across the conference table without ceremony, the way you hand someone a glass of water. Like it was the most ordinary thing in the world, and I thought, Renata is getting dressed right now. She's standing in front of a mirror somewhere, smoothing her hair, thinking today is going to be the best day of her life. She has absolutely no idea. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. Drop your city in the comments. I always love knowing where in the world you are when you watch these. Today, I want to tell you about the 2 years between my wedding day and the moment I held that deed. 2 years that I spent being called dramatic, ungrateful, oversensitive, and delusional by nearly every person in my family. 2 years during which my sister Renata smiled at me across dinner tables and holiday gatherings and told people we had worked through our differences. Some people, even now, think I went too far. After everything you are about to hear, I genuinely want to know what you think, because I am not here to convince you I was right. I am here to tell you exactly what happened, start to finish, and let you decide for yourself. To understand what that deed meant, I have to take you back to the very beginning. Not the wedding, we will get there. I have to take you back to the family I was born into because that context is everything. My name is Lorna Castle. I am 38 years old. I grew up in a mid-sized city in Georgia, the elder of two daughters born to Gino and Myerla Castle. My father owned a small commercial printing company that did steady, unglamorous work, business cards, event programs, restaurant menus. My mother managed their home finances and in practice managed the emotional economy of our family with the kind of invisible labor that never gets acknowledged until it stops. We were comfortable, not wealthy but comfortable. Private school was not in our budget, but family vacations were, and we never worried about the lights staying on. I tell you this because it matters. We were not a family divided by money, at least not at first. We were divided by something older and quieter than money. We were divided by who my parents had decided, somewhere in my early childhood and long before I had any say in it, was the special one. Renata is 3 years younger than me. She came into the world looking like a painting, dark curling hair, enormous brown eyes, a laugh that my mother used to describe as a gift from God. I do not say this with bitterness anymore. It is simply the truth. Renata was beautiful in the way that makes people stop mid-sentence when a child walks into a room. And my parents, particularly my mother, treated that beauty like a divine instruction. From the time Renata was old enough to notice the difference, she was handled with a particular tenderness that I was not. Not cruelly, my parents were not cruel people, at least not in the ways that leave visible marks. It was subtler than that. It was the way my father's face changed when Renata entered a room. It was the way my mother retold Renata's stories at dinner parties and let mine drift into silence. It was the accumulated weight of 1,000 small moments where the message was, "You're the capable one, the reliable one. Your sister needs more. You can handle it." I handled it by becoming extremely competent. If I could not be the favorite, I would be the one no one ever had to worry about. I studied hard, earned a partial scholarship to State University, graduated with a degree in hospitality and event management, and went to work for a regional event planning firm called Bracken and Associates. I was good at my job from the very first year, not because I had exceptional talent, though I like to think I have some, but because I worked harder than anyone around me, and I never allowed myself the luxury of cutting corners. By 27, I was a senior event coordinator. By 29, I had been promoted to director of corporate accounts. By 31, I had built a client roster that represented roughly 60% of Bracken's annual revenue, a fact that my mother acknowledged once briefly before pivoting the conversation to something Renata had done that week. Renata, meanwhile, had developed a passion for weddings, not the logistics of them, the aesthetic of them. The flowers, the tablecloths, the architectural quality of a venue lit at golden hour. She had taken some courses, assisted at a few events, and declared herself a wedding stylist. She had 3 clients in 2 years and a beautiful Instagram account. My mother spoke about Renata's career with the reverence usually reserved for Nobel laureates. She spoke about mine the way you mention a reliable household appliance. Lorna has always been so steady, she would say, which in our family's private language translated to, "Nothing Lorna does surprises us anymore." I met Daniel Ferris at a corporate event I managed in the spring of my 30th year. He was the account director for one of my biggest clients, a logistics firm called Meridian Solutions, and he was funny and warm and paid attention to me in the specific way that people who are genuinely interested in you pay attention, asking follow-up questions, remembering things I had mentioned in passing, finding me across a crowded room, and making his way over with the calm certainty of someone who had already decided. We dated for 14 months before he proposed. He proposed in our apartment with a ring he had designed himself using a sketch he had found in a notebook I kept for ideas, and I said yes before he finished the question. Here is what I should tell you about Daniel, and I will keep it brief because he is not the protagonist of this story. He was a genuinely good person who, over the course of our engagement, developed a fatal weakness for my sister's attention. Not all at once, not obviously. It happened the way most slow disasters happen, incrementally, with enough plausible deniability at each step that I kept choosing to believe the benign interpretation. Renata began spending more time at our apartment. She said she wanted to help plan the wedding. She had opinions about venues, strong ones, and one of her strongest was about Belhaven Estate, a converted 19th century property about 40 minutes outside the city, with formal gardens and a glass pavilion that had been featured in 3 regional wedding publications. Belhaven was Renata's dream venue. She talked about it constantly, how she would style it one day for a client, how she would photograph it for her portfolio, how when she eventually got married, if she ever got married, she would want exactly that garden at exactly that light. We did not book Belhaven. It was outside our budget, and I chose a beautiful venue that fit our numbers without stress. Renata helped with florals. She was at our apartment for planning sessions twice a week throughout our 8-month engagement, and I was grateful, genuinely. I thought we were finally building something like a real friendship, the kind sisters are supposed to have, but that we had never quite managed. I thought her enthusiasm for our wedding was an expression of love. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about a great many things in those 8 months, and every single one of them, I learned later, had been carefully arranged. If you have ever been counted out by someone who should have known better, someone who looked at your steadiness and mistook it for simplicity, you know exactly what that particular silence feels like. The silence where you smile and nod and file the information away because you have learned that your insight is not welcome, that your perception is inconvenient, that the family narrative requires you to be the one who does not notice things. I had been trained for 28 years to perform that silence. What Renata never understood was that I had also spent 28 years watching. The wedding was on a Saturday in October, 2 years and 4 months ago. The venue was a restored mill property called Greystone Mill, with exposed brick and high windows and a ceremony space in the original wheel room that I had fallen in love with on first sight. We had 112 guests. The flowers were cream and burgundy. The catering was from a chef Daniel and I had found through a mutual friend, and the food was extraordinary. I remember standing in the bridal suite at 4:45 in the afternoon, looking at myself in the full-length mirror and feeling something close to perfect happiness. Not the performed happiness of someone who needs the day to be flawless for external validation, but genuine, quiet, internal joy. I had built this. I was about to marry a man I loved. For one afternoon, the family politics, the professional competitiveness, the low-level static of a lifetime of being the capable but not the favorite daughter, all of it was going to go quiet. It went quiet for exactly 2 hours and 17 minutes. The ceremony was beautiful. I cried at the right moments and not at the wrong ones. Daniel cried, which surprised me and moved me deeply. My father walked me down the aisle with more presence than he had shown in years, and I thought I saw something in his face that I had been waiting for my whole life, something like real pride, unfiltered and unqualified. We exchanged our vows. The officiant was a friend of ours named Petra Halloway, who had a gift for making ceremonies feel intimate rather than performative. When she said the words, they meant something. And then we were at the reception. The room was full and warm and loud in the good way, the way that means people are actually having a good time rather than performing it. I was at the sweetheart table about 40 minutes into the reception dinner when I looked up to find Daniel and noticed he was not beside me. He had stepped away, bathroom, I assumed. I waited a few minutes. Then I noticed my matron of honor, Felicity Braga, looking at me from across the room with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Felicity is the kind of person who manages her expressions with military precision. The look on her face in that moment bypassed every layer of her composure, which meant whatever she had seen was severe. I found him behind the venue's east wing, in the garden corridor that connected the reception hall to the outdoor space. He was with Renata. They were not touching when I turned the corner. They separated with enough speed to tell me they had been touching before I arrived. Renata had her hands pressed flat against the stone wall behind her. Daniel had his back to me. He turned when he heard my footsteps, and the expression on his face was not guilt exactly. It was something more complicated than guilt. It was the expression of someone who has been caught in a moment they have been quietly inhabiting for a very long time. Lorna, he said, just my name, nothing after it. Renata looked at me over his shoulder. Her chin was lifted slightly, not ashamed, positioned. We need to talk, she said, all 3 of us. I stood very still. I could hear the music from the reception, a song I had chosen specifically, one that Daniel and I had danced to in our kitchen on a Tuesday night 6 months earlier. I could hear my own heartbeat in a way I usually cannot. I looked at my husband of 2 hours and 17 minutes, and I looked at my sister, and I made a decision in approximately 4 seconds that I have thought about many times since. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I did not make a scene that would give either of them the satisfaction of having broken me publicly on my own wedding day. I said, "Not tonight." Then I walked back into the reception, sat down at the sweetheart table, accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server, and smiled for the next 3 hours like my entire world was not quietly dissolving behind a stone wall 40 feet away. That was the last performance I gave freely. Every performance after that one I gave on purpose. Hello, I am Lorna Castle, and this is the story of what I built in the ruins of a day I thought would be the happiest of my life. Stay with me. I need to tell you about the weeks after the wedding first, because what happened in those weeks is the foundation of everything that came later, and if I skip it, you will not understand why I made the choices I made. Daniel and I did not separate immediately. That sounds strange to say, and I understand how it sounds. Let me explain. When I walked back into that reception and spent 3 hours being gracious and warm and entirely composed, I was not in denial. I was not protecting a marriage I thought could be saved. I was thinking. Specifically, I was thinking about what I knew and what I did not yet know, and what the difference between those two categories might cost me. What I knew, my husband and my sister had been involved in something that predated my wedding day. The speed of their separation, the positioning of her body against that wall, the practiced flatness in his voice when he said my name, none of that was the body language of two people caught in a single impulsive moment. That was the body language of two people who had rehearsed for this conversation. What I did not know, how long, how far, and who else knew. What those unknowns might cost me, everything if I reacted before I understood the full shape of what I was dealing with. So I thought, I smiled. I danced with my father. I hugged guests and thanked them for coming and accepted their congratulations with a warmth that 3 hours earlier would have been completely genuine and was now completely deliberate. When Daniel and I left the venue together that night, because we did leave together, because I was not prepared to blow up our joint finances and our shared apartment and the professional relationships our lives were intertwined through based on 2 minutes behind a stone wall, I told him we would talk in the morning. He said, "Lorna, I'm so sorry." I said, "I know." And then I turned off the light and lay in the dark listening to him breathe until I fell asleep. The conversation in the morning was one of the worst of my life, but not in the way you might expect. There was no screaming. There was very little crying from either of us. What there was instead was a slow, methodical excavation, the kind that leaves you more exhausted than a blowout would because you cannot stop once you have started, and every answer only opens new questions, and by the end you have an entirely clear picture of something you genuinely wish you did not understand so well. He told me it had been going on for 4 months. He told me it had started when Renata came to him directly, alone, without me present, ostensibly to discuss a detail of the wedding that she said I was stressed about and she wanted to handle herself. He told me that in that conversation she had said things to him, specific things about me, about our relationship, about his needs and whether I was meeting them, that had gotten under his skin in a way he had not expected and had not been able to dislodge. He told me he was not proud of this. He told me that he loved me and that he had genuinely loved me and that he did not know when exactly the two things, love for me and whatever was happening with Renata, had begun to coexist in him, but that they had, and he was sorry. I asked him what she had said. In that first conversation, he would not tell me. He said it did not matter. I told him it mattered to me. He said he did not want to hurt me more than he already had. I said, "Daniel, tell me what she said." He looked at his hands for a long time. Then he said, "She told me that you had been looking for a reason to leave for the past year, that you'd said to her that you weren't sure you wanted to go through with it, that you felt trapped." I sat with that for a moment. I had never said anything remotely like that to Renata, not a word of it, not even in the form of normal pre-wedding nerves which I had experienced and managed privately, telling exactly one person, Felicity, who I trusted completely. "She made it up," I said. He did not answer right away, which told me that some part of him even then had already suspected this. "She was very convincing," he said finally. "I know she was," I said. "She always is." That conversation lasted 4 hours. By the end of it, I had established, to my own satisfaction, the complete outline of what had happened. My sister, who had coveted Daniel for reasons I still do not entirely understand, whether it was genuine feeling or simple acquisitiveness, the need to have what was mine, had spent 4 months carefully dismantling the foundation of my marriage before it was even legally formalized. She had done it with precision and patience, using fabricated confidences and manufactured doubts, and she had timed it to detonate on the day I would be least equipped to respond strategically. She had been planning this, possibly from the moment Daniel and I got engaged, possibly from before that. I called my attorney, Claudia Voss, 3 days after my wedding. Claudia had handled a property dispute for me 2 years earlier, and she was sharp, thorough, and refreshingly free of sentimentality. I did not call her about a divorce, not yet. I called her because I knew that whatever came next was going to involve my parents in ways I could not yet fully anticipate, and I wanted someone in my corner who understood how these things moved before they started moving. Claudia's first piece of advice was simple: document everything, say nothing, and do not make any financial decisions until you know the complete landscape. I documented everything. In the weeks that followed, I did several things simultaneously. I separated from Daniel, not publicly, not with lawyers yet, but practically in the quiet way of two adults who have understood what they are to each other and are waiting for the right moment to formalize it. He moved to a short-term rental. Our joint accounts were frozen by mutual agreement. I retained Claudia formally, and I began carefully to watch my family. What I was watching for became clear within the first 2 weeks when my mother called me and said the words I had been half expecting and wholly dreading. Lorna, I think you need to hear Renata's side of this before you make any decisions. I was sitting at my kitchen table when she called, eating toast and reviewing a vendor contract for an upcoming corporate event. I set the contract down. What side does she have? I asked. My mother made a small sound, not quite a sigh, but the oral equivalent of a hand wave. She says there are things that were wrong in your relationship with Daniel that you haven't been honest about, that she was trying to help. She was trying to help, I repeated. She says Daniel came to her, that he was struggling and reached out to her because he didn't feel he could talk to you. My mother's voice had taken on the particular quality it always had when she was delivering a verdict she had already reached. Not defensive, not aggressive, just final, the way a judge sounds when they have made up their mind before the arguments are complete. Mom, I said, she made up a story about me to feed to my husband for 4 months and then blew up my marriage on my wedding day. You don't know the full picture, Lorna. I know my husband's full account of what she told him. Husbands aren't always reliable narrators. I almost laughed. I genuinely almost laughed because the specificity of that particular deflection, attacking Daniel's reliability rather than Renata's honesty, was so precisely the move I had predicted that it felt almost scripted. I have to go, I said. I have work. I hung up. I sat for a moment with my hand flat on the kitchen table, looking at the grain of the wood. Then I called Claudia and told her what my mother had said. Claudia noted it. We added it to the file. Here is the thing about files: they grow. The first addition to the file in those early weeks was my mother's call. The second was a conversation my father attempted to have with me at what was supposed to be a neutral family dinner 3 weeks after the wedding, a dinner my mother had organized under the pretense of checking in. I almost did not go. Felicity told me not to go. But I went because I wanted to see the shape of what I was dealing with, and because going gave me data that not going would have denied me. My father sat across from me at the dinner table and said, with genuine sadness in his voice, "Your sister is going through something difficult." I said, "I imagine she is." "She cares about you," he said. "This isn't what she intended." "What did she intend, Dad?" He shifted in his seat. My father's tell, the one I had cataloged over 31 years, was that he touched his watch when he was uncomfortable, not dramatically, just the briefest contact of thumb and forefinger against the face of it. He did it now. "She thought she was being a good friend to Daniel," he said. "She is not Daniel's friend," I said. "She is my sister." "These things are complicated," my father said. My mother said nothing for the entirety of that exchange. She served food, refilled glasses, maintained a careful domestic performance that I recognized as the armor she put on when she had already committed to a position and did not want it tested. I had grown up watching my mother deploy that armor. I knew what it meant, she had decided. The family's resources, emotional, financial, social, were going to flow toward Renata. They always had. The only difference now was that I was old enough to see the architecture of it clearly, and Renata had given it a catastrophic new form. I ate dinner. I complimented the food. I left before dessert and drove home listening to a podcast about commercial real estate, because that was what I was listening to in those weeks, and the normalcy of it steadied me. My hand did not shake on the wheel. My throat did not close. I was already building something, though I could not have named it precisely yet. I was already thinking about leverage. I was already thinking about time. The divorce process began formally in the 2nd month after the wedding. I will not dwell on the details because they are not what this story is about. What matters for what comes later is that by the time Daniel and I were legally separated and working with our respective attorneys toward a settlement, several additional facts had emerged that I had not known on my wedding day. The first fact: Renata and Daniel had, by the time of our separation, made their relationship public within our social circle. Not an announcement, nothing so honest as that. Just the slow, deliberate drift of them appearing at the same events, being seen in the same places, the gradual osmosis by which a secret becomes a known thing that everyone pretends not to know. The second fact: my parents had been aware of Renata and Daniel's involvement for at least 6 weeks before my wedding. My mother had not known the full extent of it, but she had known enough, she had seen enough, been told enough by Renata, to understand that something was happening and to choose not to tell me. I learned this not from my parents but from my father's sister, my Aunt Cecily Delmer, who called me 2 months into the separation and said, with the quiet directness of a woman who had spent 60 years watching my mother operate, "Lorna, your mother knew. I want you to know that I told her she should tell you, and she told me it would sort itself out." I thanked Aunt Cecily. I added that to the file. I sat with it for a very long time. The third fact, and this one arrived like a stone through a window, was financial. In reviewing the records related to our divorce settlement, my attorney discovered that Daniel had, in the months leading up to our wedding, redirected a portion of our joint savings into a personal account. The amount was not catastrophic in absolute terms, $62,000, but it was enough to matter, and the timing of it, which corresponded precisely with the period during which Renata had been feeding him the story about my wanting to leave, was not a coincidence. He was preparing, Claudia said when she showed me the documentation. She said it without drama, like a radiologist identifying a fracture on an X-ray. He was preparing, I agreed. Your sister knew about this. It was not a question. We both understood the sequence. Renata plants doubt. Daniel begins protecting assets. The groundwork is laid. By the time my wedding day arrived, the exit strategy had already been built. I had walked down the aisle into a ceremony that was, on one side of it, genuine and on the other side, a closing act. The knowledge of that $62,000 changed something in me. Not broke something, I want to be precise about that. It did not break anything. It clarified something. Up until that point, I had been processing what had happened as a betrayal by two people I had trusted. After that, I began processing it as something more specific, a coordinated extraction. Which meant it was not about emotion at all. It was about assets. It was about position. It was about what each of them stood to gain. That reframing changed what I wanted in return. I want to pause here and tell you something about Renata and Belhaven Estate because it matters now. Renata's obsession with Belhaven was not casual. She had been talking about that property for 6 years by the time of my wedding. She had photographed it from the outside and from the road for her portfolio. She had reached out to their events coordinator twice about the possibility of forming a referral partnership, though nothing had come of those conversations. She had told everyone, our parents, her friends, her social media followers, that Belhaven was where her career was going to arrive. It was going to be her signature venue. It was going to be the place people associated with her name. She spoke about it the way some people speak about a destination they have been saving for their whole lives, not as a possibility but as an inevitability, a thing that was waiting for her to be ready. I had always known about this obsession. I had listened to Renata describe Belhaven so many times over so many family dinners that I could describe the property from memory. The converted main house with its original plaster medallions, the glass pavilion built in the 1990s that had managed to look completely at home against the 19th century stone, the formal garden with the espaliered apple trees along the south wall. I knew what it meant to her. I filed that knowledge away, the way I had been filing things away since I was old enough to understand that information was the only currency our family had ever distributed equally. In the 4th month after the wedding, Renata made her first mistake. Not her first strategic error, those had been building for months. Her first public mistake, the one that moved the landscape in a way I had not anticipated, and that gave me my first real opening. She and Daniel attended a charity gala that 3 of my major corporate clients also attended. This was not, by itself, unusual. Our professional circles overlapped in ways that proximity made inevitable. What was unusual was that Renata, who had apparently decided that the separation of my marriage was far enough along to constitute a kind of social permission, spent a portion of that evening telling people, several of them people I worked with directly, that I had been emotionally unavailable in my marriage, that Daniel had struggled, and that she had simply been a support to him. She framed it sympathetically. She framed it as concern. She framed herself as someone who had found themselves in a complicated situation they had not sought. One of the people she said this to was a woman named Bria Solano, who was the events director at one of my anchor clients and who had worked with me for 4 years and liked me genuinely. Bria called me the morning after the gala. "I thought you should know," Bria said. She was working the room with it. She wasn't subtle. I thanked Bria. I sat very quietly after I hung up. Then I made a note of exactly what Bria had told me, the date, the venue, the names of the other people Renata had spoken to, and I added it to the file. I called Claudia. "She's starting to talk," I said. "Let her," Claudia said. "Right now, everything she says is evidence of intent. Let her establish the pattern. We'll use it." I let her. What I was learning in those months was the difference between reacting and responding. Reacting is instinctive, emotional, immediate, and almost always gives the other person information they can use against you. Responding is deliberate, timed, and designed to produce a specific outcome. Renata and my mother and my father all expected me to react. They expected tears, confrontation, family meetings, the messy, explosive work of grievance. They were watching for it. They were, I believe, counting on it because a grieving, reactant Lorna was a predictable Lorna, one they could manage and navigate around. A quiet Lorna, one who smiled at family dinners and filed documents and paid attention to real estate listings, was not a version of me they had a playbook for. The divorce was finalized in month 6. Settlement was, given everything, relatively straightforward. Our joint assets divided. Daniels redirected $62,000 included in the calculation at Claudia's insistence, the apartment going to me since I had contributed the larger share of the original purchase. Daniel did not fight it. He was, I think, not without conscience, and the documentation of what he had done with those funds had a quieting effect on his attorney's more aggressive early positions. He signed. I signed. It was done. I was 32 years old, recently divorced, and thoroughly awake in a way I had not been before. Not angry, I want to be clear about that, because anger is an energy that burns through resources you need for other things. What I was focused. I had a picture in my mind, and I was building toward it, and every professional success I achieved in the months following the divorce went into that picture like a piece of a puzzle. At Bracken and Associates, I had continued to perform at the level my clients expected. If anything, the year following my divorce was the strongest of my professional career to that point. I managed 14 major corporate events, expanded our client base by 3 accounts, and generated in that calendar year approximately 40% more revenue than I had in the year prior. I told no one at work what had happened in my personal life and the boundary held. My professional reputation was intact, respected, and growing. Renata's career, meanwhile, was also growing. By month 8 after the wedding, she had acquired several new wedding clients, a few of them through connections that I knew, indirectly, had come from Daniel's professional network. She was posting more on social media. She was getting tagged at venues I recognized. She was doing the thing she had always been doing, building her aesthetic brand, but now with the social capital of being the woman who had ended up with my husband, which in certain circles carried a strange, perverse form of interest. People watched her because the story was dramatic, and she performed for that audience with a comfort that told me she had never once considered the possibility that the audience might eventually turn. My parents in this period funded her. This is not a detail I am inserting for dramatic effect. It is a documented fact that I will return to. My father's printing company was not thriving. The commercial printing industry had been compressing for years, and Gino Castle had not modernized quickly enough. He was solvent, but barely, and the comfort that had characterized my childhood had given way to something more carefully maintained than real. Despite this, my parents continued to pay Renata's apartment rental, subsidize her vehicle, and, as I would learn later, provide direct cash infusions into her business on at least 4 separate occasions over the following 18 months. The total of those infusions, when I eventually had the accounting for them, came to $112,000. My parents did not tell me this. I found out through Aunt Cecily again, who had seen enough family money flow in one direction over enough years to have developed a habit of keeping her own informal records of it. "Your father borrowed against the business," she told me during one of our phone calls. Aunt Cecily and I had grown closer in the year since my wedding, an irony that was not lost on me, since the only person in my family who had actively chosen to be on my side was the one my mother had always treated as a peripheral figure. He took out a line of credit in February. Most of it has gone to Renata. I was at my desk when she told me this. I remember the quality of the afternoon light through my office window. "How much?" I asked. She told me. I thanked her. Added it to the file. I called Claudia. "That's relevant if they ever come to you for money," Claudia said. "They will," I said. "Give it 6 months. It took 4. My father called me in the 12th month after the wedding. My mother was on the line as well, though she had not announced herself. I heard her breathing in the background before she spoke. My father said he wanted to talk about family finances, which was a phrase I had learned over the preceding year to translate with extreme precision. What it meant in Castle family language was, "We need something from you." He explained that the business was going through a difficult period. He explained that they had some expenses that had been unexpected. He did not mention Renata's name, though she was the unexpected expense he was not mentioning. He asked if I would be able to help with a bridge loan, his word loan as if the taxonomy mattered, of $75,000. I let a beat of silence sit between us. "Dad," I said, "I love you, but I can't do that right now." My mother's voice entered the conversation then, direct and certain. "Lorna, family helps family." "I agree," I said, "which is why I'm also not going to pretend that the money you borrowed against the business didn't go to Renata." A pause, the particular silence of 2 people recalibrating. "How do you know about that?" my mother asked. "Because I pay attention," I said. My mother made the sound she made when she was angry in a way she could not express directly, a short exhale through the nose, controlled and dismissive. "Your sister needed support. She was building something." "I know she was. I have also been building something. Neither of you has ever offered me a bridge loan." "You've always been fine," my father said. There it was, the essential logic of the Castle family structure, stated plainly for the first time in my adult memory. Lorna is always fine. Lorna does not need help. Lorna is the one we take from, not the one we give to, because Lorna is the capable one, which means we have decided she is not entitled to the consideration we extend automatically to her sister. "I have to go," I said. "I hope things get easier." I hung up. I sat for a very long time. And then I did the thing I had been slowly, carefully doing for the past 12 months. I opened my real estate research folder and I looked at the notes I had been compiling for 7 months on Belhaven Estate. Because here is what I had learned in the course of the previous year, while being quiet and filing things and paying attention. Belhaven Estate was in financial difficulty. Property's owners, a family trust managed by an attorney named Wendell Pratt, had been dealing with a combination of deferred maintenance costs, decreased bookings during a period of economic uncertainty, and a generational dispute among the trust's 3 beneficiaries about the property's future. The estate was not on the open market, but it was not entirely unavailable either. It was, to use the word that had been living in my head for 7 months like a seed waiting for water, acquirable. I had been meeting quarterly with a commercial real estate broker named Osai Tambali, who I had worked with on venue sourcing for corporate events, and who had, over those meetings, developed a picture of what I was interested in that was detailed enough for him to know when something relevant surfaced. He had been the one who flagged Belhaven's situation to me 8 months earlier in the careful language of a broker who knows when to say a thing and how to say it so it sounds like information rather than solicitation. The Pratt Trust is having conversations, he had told me. Nothing formal yet, but conversations. I told him to keep listening. I told him what I was willing to consider. I told him nothing else. Meanwhile, Renata had also heard about Belhaven's difficulties. Of course she had been monitoring that property for years, and the word in the event planning community about its financial situation was not a secret among people who paid attention to venues. She had reached out to Wendell Pratt's office directly. She had expressed interest in some form of partnership arrangement, possibly a preferred vendor agreement, possibly something more formal. I knew this because the event planning community in our city was not large, and people talked, and 2 separate people who knew both Renata and me had mentioned, in passing, that Renata had been sniffing around Belhaven. What neither Renata nor those 2 people knew was that I had already had 3 substantive meetings with Osai Tambali about a potential acquisition, that Claudia Voss had already reviewed the trust documents and identified a path to purchase, and that I had already arranged, through a combination of savings, a business line of credit, and a private loan from Aunt Cecily, who had offered, unprompted, in a phone call that I still think about when I need to remember what loyalty looks like, the financing to make a serious offer. Aunt Cecily had called me on a Tuesday morning early before 7, which was unusual for her. I have been thinking about what you're doing, she said. What am I doing? I asked carefully. I don't know exactly, she said, but I know you're building something. I know it involves Belhaven. I've heard enough about that place over enough years from your sister that I know it matters. And I know that whatever you're doing is going to be expensive. She paused. I have $400,000 in a bond fund that is doing nothing interesting. I would like to give you $300,000 of it as a personal loan at 2% interest, payable over 10 years, no early repayment penalty. I put my hand over my mouth, not for effect, no one was watching, just because the feeling that moved through me in that moment was too large for my face to contain without assistance. Aunt Cecily, I said, don't thank me yet, she said. Just use it well. I used it well. In month 15 after the wedding, I made a formal offer to the Pratt Trust for Belhaven Estate. The offer was for $780,000, which was above what the trust had been informally expecting based on the property's assessed value, adjusted for the deferred maintenance. The offer included a closing timeline that was faster than the trust's other expressions of interest. I had done the research on those through OSI, and a clear statement of intended use, private event and hospitality management. Wendell Pratt, who was a methodical man in his late 60s who cared more about the property's continuity than about extracting maximum value, was receptive from the first conversation. We went into due diligence. The property inspections revealed what the deferred maintenance numbers had suggested: significant but manageable work needed on the glass pavilion's structural supports, the main house's HVAC system, and the garden's irrigation infrastructure. Claudia negotiated a price reduction to $745,000 to account for those costs. The trust accepted. Closing was scheduled for 3 months out. In those 3 months, I continued my life with extreme normalcy. I went to work. I managed events. I attended 2 family dinners, neither of which I was particularly wanted at, but both of which I attended because visibility mattered. At the second of those dinners, Renata, who had by this point moved in with Daniel, a development that I had absorbed with the same flat accounting I applied to all the information I gathered, mentioned Belhaven. Casually, to no one in particular, the way she always mentioned it, as a future she was moving toward. I've actually been in contact with the trusts, she said. I think there might be a real opportunity there, a proper partnership, maybe even something more involved. My mother lit up in a way that was genuine and immediate. That would be wonderful, Renata. My father made an approving sound. I looked at the center of the dinner table where there was a ceramic bowl of fruit that had been there every Sunday dinner of my childhood. I looked at it and I thought about the closing date, which was 6 weeks away. I said, "That sounds exciting." Renata looked at me briefly, perhaps surprised by the mildness of my response. Her hand went to the pendant she always wore, a thin gold disc on a delicate chain that she touched when she was trying to read a room. She touched it now, looking at me. "It's a beautiful property," she said. "It really is," I agreed. She watched me for a moment longer than the conversation required, then she let it go. I was meeting with Osai twice a week at that point. We had engaged a property management firm, Hadley Group, to take over operations at Belhaven once the sale closed, and Osa had connections with several event planning companies who were, as he put it, extremely interested in access to a property of Belhaven's caliber that they had previously not been able to approach because of the previous owner's restrictive vendor policies. I had been in conversation with 4 of those companies. 3 of them were Renata's direct competitors, firms that operated in the same high-end wedding and event space, firms whose clients were precisely the clients Renata wanted, firms who would, under normal circumstances, never have prioritized a venue that Renata was associated with. Under the lease structure I was building, they would not just have access to Belhaven, they would have exclusive access. 5-year lease agreements, individually structured for each company, covering specific event types and date ranges that, taken together, would create a calendar so fully committed to those 3 firms that there would be no meaningful space left for an independent wedding stylist named Renata Floriano to ever bring a client through those gardens. The structure was Claudia's design. I want to give her credit for that. I came to her with the general concept. I own the venue, I lease it to her competitors, and Claudia transformed it into something airtight, something that was entirely legal and entirely impenetrable, something that Renata and her attorneys would look at and find no seam to pull. "This will hold," Claudia told me, in the meeting where she walked me through the final lease structures. She said it with the quiet satisfaction of a craftsperson who has done their best work. 5 years from closing, her competitors will have established relationships, event histories, and client bases tied to this property. She will not. "That's correct," I said. Claudia looked at me. She had a habit, the one I had catalogued over 2 years of working together, of pressing her thumbnail against the side of her index finger when she was thinking something she was not sure she should say. She was doing it now. "This is thorough," she said. "Yes," I said. "You've thought about this for a long time." 14 months, I said, give or take. She nodded. She pressed her thumbnail against her finger one more time, then she said, "She really did a number on you." "She did," I said, "but I've been a number on her too. She just doesn't know it yet." The closing date arrived on a Wednesday in early spring. I sat in the conference room of Claudia's firm with Osa on my left and Claudia on my right, and across from us sat Wendell Pratt and his associate and a notary and a stack of documents roughly 2 inches thick. The signing took 45 minutes. When it was done, Wendell Pratt shook my hand and said he was glad the property was going to someone who understood what it was, which I thought was one of the kinder things anyone had said to me in 2 years. I drove home alone. I had a glass of wine on my apartment balcony and looked at the city and thought about Renata getting dressed somewhere, styling someone's bouquet, talking about Belhaven the way she always talked about it, as a future that was waiting for her. And then I thought about Aunt Cecily, who had looked at me across all the silence and all the sideways accounting of our family and chosen, without fanfare or conditions, to put her faith in me. I called her that evening. "It's done," I said. "Tell me," she said. So I told her about Wendell Pratt's handshake and the 2 inches of documents and the drive home and the wine. She listened to all of it without interrupting, and when I was done, she was quiet for a moment. "Your grandmother would have loved this," she said. "Your mother's mother, I mean, not your father's mother. She would have been horrified." I laughed, a real laugh, the first one in a while that came from somewhere uncalculated. "Aunt Cecily," I said, "thank you. For the money and for the call that morning and for telling me the things you told me, all of it. You would have gotten here without me," she said. "Maybe," I said, "but not as fast." The lease agreements were executed in the 3 weeks following the closing. All 3 competing firms signed. The first events at Belhaven under the new management structure were booked within the month, 2 corporate retreats through Hadley Group's own channels and a wedding through the first of the 3 partner firms. That wedding was photographed extensively and posted on the partner firm's social media, with, I noted, a number of aerial drone shots that showed Belhaven's formal garden at exactly the golden hour light that Renata had been referencing in conversations about this property for 6 years. I watched those photos load on my phone one morning before work. The garden looked exactly the way Renata had always described it. Extraordinary, actually. The espaliered apple trees along the south wall were in early blossom, and the glass pavilion caught the light in a way that made it look like something from another era entirely. I thought she was not wrong about the beauty of it. She just miscalculated who was going to be standing in it. Renata had reached out to Wendell Pratt's office to follow up on her earlier expression of interest approximately 1 week after my closing. She received, I am told, a polite note from his associate indicating that the property had changed hands and that all future inquiries should be directed to the new ownership and management team. The new ownership and management team's point of contact was a woman named Suki Hadley at Hadley Group, who had been briefed entirely on the leasing structure and had been given clear instructions on how to handle any inquiry from Renata Floriano or any business entity associated with her name. Renata called Hadley Group. Suki Hadley told her the calendar was committed through the next 5 years and that there was no capacity for new vendor partnerships at this time. She was professional and courteous and entirely final. Renata then, I am told, asked who the new owner was. Suki said the ownership structure was held through a private entity and that she was not in a position to share that information. Renata pushed, Suki held. For 4 weeks after that conversation, Renata apparently believed the new owner was one of the competing firms directly, that one of them had somehow acquired the property and was simply shutting her out. She called the firms. None of them confirmed or denied anything because none of them had anything to confirm or deny. They were tenants. They did not know who owned the building they were renting. The person who told her eventually was not me, it was my mother. My mother had pieced it together, I am not sure exactly how, though I suspect it was a combination of Aunt Cecily's relaxed attitude about what she considered her own business and a process of elimination that my mother, who was a sharper woman than she had ever been given credit for, was fully capable of conducting. She had called me one evening and asked directly, "Did you buy Bellhaven?" I had paused for exactly one beat. "Yes," I said, another pause longer. "And the leases?" she asked. "Yes," I said. The silence after that was a different quality than the silences I was used to from my mother. It was not the silence of her managing a narrative or preparing a position. It was the silence of someone encountering something they had genuinely not anticipated. "Lorna," she said finally. "Yes, Mom, that's," she stopped, started again. "When did you, 14 months ago, give or take?" Another silence, long enough that I wondered if she had set the phone down. "She's going to be devastated," my mother said. I thought about the stone garden wall. I thought about Daniel's face turning toward me in the corridor. I thought about $62,000 redirected in the months before my wedding. I thought about $112,000 in bridge loans that had never once been offered to me. I thought about Aunt Cecily's Tuesday morning call before 7 and the weight of a bond fund that had chosen me when my own parents had not. "I know," I said. Lorna, my mother's voice had something in it I had not heard from her in a very long time, possibly ever, not quite remorse, something adjacent to it. "Is this?" She stopped again. "It's done, Mom," I said. "The deed is in my hand." I said it calmly, the way you state a fact that is no longer negotiable, no performance, no satisfaction in the delivery, or rather, only the deep, quiet satisfaction of a thing precisely accomplished, not cruelty, completion. "There's going to be a conversation we need to have," I said. "All of us, but not tonight. I'll let you know when." I ended the call. I set my phone down on the kitchen table next to the grain of the wood that I had been looking at on the worst mornings of the past 2 years. I sat with the quiet of the apartment, which was mine entirely now, which smelled like the candle I had lit that morning and the coffee I had made at 6 and the absolutely ordinary texture of a life I had rebuilt without anyone's permission or help. I had all the proof I needed, and I had something better than proof. I had the deed. I had the leases. I had Aunt Cecily's faith executed in legal tender. I had 14 months of careful, patient, completely deliberate construction, and it had produced the exact structure I had been building toward since the moment I walked back into my own wedding reception and smiled for 3 hours at the ruins of a life I had thought I was stepping into. Now I just needed the right stage. If you're still with me, stay, because what I did next is the reason I am telling you this story. The stage arrived in the form of a family event that my mother had been planning for 3 months, my parents' 35th wedding anniversary dinner, 40 people. A private room at a restaurant called Aldersgate, which my mother had chosen because it was the same restaurant where my parents had gone on their first date. Sentimental, deliberate, exactly the kind of setting my mother loved, warmth and history, and the assembled weight of everyone who mattered to her, all in one room. I had known about the dinner since my mother mentioned it in passing, casually, 4 months before the event. She had not been certain when she mentioned it whether I would be invited. That uncertainty had resolved itself. She had called me 6 weeks out and asked if I would come, in the particular tone of someone who was extending an olive branch they were not sure would be accepted and were not entirely sure they wanted accepted. I told her I would be there. I told her I was looking forward to it. I had been looking forward to it since the moment she mentioned it 4 months earlier. In the 6 weeks between that call and the dinner, I had done several things. I had met with Claudia once more, not about the leases, those were done and sealed and required no further attention, but about a piece of documentation I had been holding for 3 months. A formal accounting of the $112,000 in family funds that had been directed to Renata over the preceding 2 years, prepared by an independent accountant named Warren Delacroix, who Claudia had brought in specifically for this purpose. The document was not a legal instrument in itself. What it was a record, precise, dated, sourced, of an imbalance that I intended to name. I had also spoken to Felicity Braga, who was the only person outside of Claudia and Aunt Cecily who knew the complete shape of what I had built and what I was planning. Felicity had been with me since the beginning, since the night of the wedding, when she had looked at me across the reception room with that unmanageable expression on her face, and I had understood, before anyone told me anything, that something was wrong. She had been the keeper of information I had shared with no one else, the person I had called on the worst nights when not having another human being who knew the truth felt intolerable. "Tell me you're going to let it land," Felicity said, in our last conversation before the dinner. We were at her kitchen table, eating the takeout she always ordered on Sunday evenings, and the casualness of the setting made the conversation feel both serious and bearable in equal measure. "It's going to land," I said. "Tell me you're not going to be subtle about it." I looked at her. "Lorna," she said, with the emphasis of someone who had watched me be subtle for 2 years and was issuing a formal objection. "I am going to be very clear," I said. She pointed her fork at me. "Good." I spent the week before the dinner in a state of calm that surprised even me. Not the performed calm of the wedding reception, this was different. This was the calm of someone who has done the work, checked the structure, and is simply waiting for the moment to use it. I slept well, I ate well. I managed 2 corporate events with my usual precision and went home and cooked dinner and called Aunt Cecily and talked about her garden, which was her great passion in retirement, for 40 minutes. On the day of the dinner, I wore the dress I had bought specifically for the occasion, a deep navy with clean lines and a neckline that my mother would consider slightly too architectural and that I considered exactly right. I arrived at Aldersgate 10 minutes early. I was, as I had planned, the first of the family to arrive. I sat at my assigned seat, which was in the middle of the long table with a clear sightline to the door and to the seat that had been reserved at the far end for Renata. I ordered water, I looked at the menu, I waited. My parents arrived next, my father first, my mother behind him, straightening his collar even as they walked. My father saw me and came to me immediately, arms out, and the hug he gave me was genuine. Whatever else was true about Gino Castle, his affection for me was real, even when his choices were not. My mother hugged me with the careful warmth of someone who was not entirely sure of the ground they were standing on, but was determined to maintain composure until they were. "You look beautiful," my mother said. "Thank you," I said. "You too." Guests arrived. The room filled. Cousins I had not seen in a year, family friends, 2 of my father's business associates, Aunt Cecily, who had arrived from 2 hours away specifically for this evening, which I knew and which she had not told my parents, and finally, 40 minutes after the start time, Renata. She walked in on Daniel's arm. He looked, as he always did, like someone who had dressed carefully and was hoping the effort would be sufficient. Renata looked extraordinary, which was her mode of arrival at all occasions. A deep red dress, her dark hair pulled back, the gold disc pendant at her throat. She scanned the room immediately upon entering, the practiced sweep of someone who reads social spaces professionally, and her eyes found me. I met her gaze. I smiled, not warmly, not unkindly either, just steadily, the way you look at something you know completely. Her hand went to her pendant. She looked away first. The dinner began. My mother gave a speech, loving, funny, full of the specific warmth she reserved for the people she had decided deserved it, and my father looked at her with the expression of a man who had spent 35 years beside this woman and found that a reasonable arrangement. I watched them and felt something complicated, love for them still, undimmed by everything, grief for what they had chosen that they did not have to choose. And beneath both of those, the steady tick of a plan that was about to complete itself. The first course was served. Conversations distributed themselves around the table in the natural way of large family dinners, clusters and crosstalk, and the occasional collective laughter that swept the whole room. I talked to my cousin Alara, who was studying architecture and had strong opinions about glass pavilions, which made me think of Belhaven and keep my expression completely neutral. I talked to my father's associate, a man named Burton Harlow, who had known my family since I was 12 and who had always treated me with more equitable regard than most of my relatives managed. I was pleasant and present and said nothing about anything that mattered. It was during the third course that Renata, who had been working her end of the table with the ease of a person who had decided the evening was hers, made a comment that traveled down the length of the table and arrived at me with enough volume for the surrounding guests to catch. "We're actually looking at a really exciting venue opportunity," she said to the cluster around her. She was addressing her comment to one of my mother's friends, a woman named Georgette Tran, who was politely attentive. "A property that I've been following for years. It's just become available in a way that might finally work for us." I set my fork down, not dramatically, quietly, with the small precision of someone making a choice. "Belhaven," I said across the table. The word traveled in the way that words do when a room has just shifted slightly toward listening. Renata looked at me, her chin lifted by approximately a degree. "Actually, yes," she said. There was a careful brightness in her voice, the brightness of someone who is not sure what the question means but is not going to show the uncertainty. "It's a beautiful property," I said. "I think it could be a real opportunity," she said. I've been in talks about a potential. Who have you been in talks with? I asked. A pause, brief, but I had been watching Renata's pauses for 35 years, and this one had a specific texture. She was recalibrating. The management company, she said, Hadley Group. They weren't particularly, she stopped, chose her words. They said the calendar was committed for the near future, but I think once I can get in front of the actual owner, Renata, I said. Something in my voice made the table go quiet, not suddenly, gradually, the way sound tapers when people understand something is about to happen. Lorna, my mother said from her end of the table, a warning. I did not look at my mother. I kept my eyes on my sister. I am the actual owner, I said. The word landed in the room the way a stone lands in still water, not with a crash but with a spreading. I watched it move. I watched it reach Renata's face first because she was closest and because I had been watching her face for 35 years and I knew every variation of its expressions, including the ones she did not know she was making. Her hand dropped from her pendant, not immediately. It lowered slowly, the way something falls when the muscles holding it simply stop receiving the signal to stay. The gold disc came to rest against her collarbone and she sat very still, and for the first time in the 2 years since my wedding day, my sister Renata Floriano looked at me without a performance operating behind her eyes. I'm sorry, she said. Her voice came out leveled and careful, the voice she used when she was buying time. I own Belhaven Estate, I said. I purchased it 7 weeks ago. The management company is Hadley Group, which is why you reached Suki Hadley when you called. The calendar you were told was committed, it is committed, to 3-year and 5-year lease agreements with 3 separate event firms, all exclusive, all documented, all executed before you made your first inquiry. The table had gone fully quiet. Not the natural lull of 40 people at a dinner, this was a different quality of silence, the kind that has a source that everyone present can feel and has oriented themselves toward. I was aware of my mother at the far end of the table, her hand around her wine glass, not drinking. I was aware of my father with both his hands flat on the table in front of him, very still. I was aware of Aunt Cecily, 3 seats to my left, looking at the centerpiece with the studied neutrality of someone who knew exactly what was happening and had decided to let it happen. I was aware of Daniel at Renata's side, who had gone the color of old paste. Renata blinked once, then she arranged her face into something that was almost steadiness. You bought Belhaven, she said, not a question, just the words aligned with effort. I bought Belhaven, I confirmed. When did you? She stopped. Something moved across her face, quick and unbidden, before she controlled it. How long have you been planning this? A while, I said. Lorna, my mother's voice from the end of the table, careful, warning-shaped. I looked at her. Mom, I'm going to need a few minutes to finish this conversation. Then we can talk about anything you'd like. My mother pressed her lips together. She did not speak again. Renata looked at Daniel. It was a quick look, the involuntary kind, the look that goes to the person you rely on when the ground shifts. Daniel did not look back at her. He was looking at the table. He had been looking at the table since I said the word purchased, and he had not looked up since. So you bought it to keep me out, Renata said. Her voice had found its footing again. There was an edge in it now, the edge that came when Renata stopped performing surprise and started performing offense, which was her second line of defense. You bought a property worth close to $1 million specifically to block my career. I bought a property at a fair market price because I recognized an investment opportunity, I said. What I did with the leases afterward was a separate decision made freely with the legal and professional advice of my attorney. That's not, her voice cut off. She looked around the table briefly, the look of someone checking how much audience they have. There was enough. Every person at that table was watching. That's not what this is, and you know it. What is it then? I asked. It's revenge, she said. The word came out sharp and certain, like she was naming the thing that would absolve her of having to examine how she had arrived here. I waited a beat. Is it revenge to make a legal business acquisition? I asked. When the acquisition is designed specifically to hurt one person, the leases are with 3 separate companies, I said. They are the ones benefiting from the arrangement. They booked a combined 14 events in the first month. That is a business performing well. Lorna, this time it was my father's voice, quiet, worn. This is not the place. I turned to look at him. He had his thumbnail against the face of his watch. Dad, I said, I chose this place with some intention. I would like the chance to explain why if you'll let me. He looked at me for a long moment, then he nodded, not permission exactly, resignation. Thank you, I said. I reached down and picked up the bag I had placed under my chair when I arrived, the one I had packed that morning with the specific, quiet care of someone who has been waiting to unpack it for 2 years. From it I removed a folder. Not thick, I had not wanted theatrics. Precisely assembled, I set it on the table in front of me and I opened it and I looked at Renata. Here is what I want to say, I said. And I want to say it in front of this family, in front of these people, because for 2 years what happened to me has been discussed, interpreted, and revised in private conversations that I was not invited to and could not correct. I would like to correct the record once on the record, and then I am done. Georgette Tran, my mother's friend 3 seats down, had stopped eating. She was looking at her plate with the focused attention of someone pretending not to be riveted. A Across from her, my cousin Alara was not pretending. She was watching me with wide, steady attention, and she had the expression of someone who had heard one version of a story for a long time and suspected it was not complete. My mother's hand tightened on her wine glass. 2 years ago, I said, on the day of my wedding, I found my husband and my sister in a private area of the venue in a situation that required no interpretation. Daniel confirmed to me the following morning that they had been involved for 4 months. He told me that during that time, Renata had told him specifically that I had confided in her that I wanted to leave the relationship, that I felt trapped, and that I was looking for a reason to end the engagement. I heard something from the vicinity of my father, a small sound, not quite speech. That story, I said, was a fabrication. I had never said any of those things to Renata. I had never said them to anyone except Felicity. I did not look at Felicity, who was not at this dinner and had not been invited, but I named her deliberately because naming her was a kind of protection and also a kind of precision, in the context of normal pre-wedding anxiety that Renata was not privy to and had no basis for reporting. I paused. I lifted the first page from the folder. In the months prior to our wedding, I continued, Daniel redirected $62,000 from our joint savings account to a personal account. The timing of that transfer corresponds with the period during which Renata was actively providing him with reasons to consider the marriage a risk. I have a record of those transfers here, prepared by an independent accountant. I am not presenting this as a legal claim. The divorce settlement accounted for those funds. I am presenting it as a factual sequence that I want this family to understand. I set the page on the table, not toward Renata, toward the center, toward everyone. Daniel's jaw tightened. He still had not looked up from the table. My mother's voice very low. Lorna, we know all of this. You know some of it, I said. I'd like to finish. She stopped. I looked back at Renata. Her posture had shifted almost imperceptibly. She was sitting slightly less upright than she had been, a degree or two of the performance gone out of her spine. Her hand was back at her pendant, not touching it, hovering near it. 8 months after the wedding, I said, you attended a charity gala where 3 of my professional clients were present. I have a first-hand account from one of those clients who called me the following morning, describing a conversation in which you characterized my marriage's failure as the result of my emotional unavailability and framed your involvement with Daniel as a supportive response to his distress. That account is also in this folder. The hovering hand settled on the pendant. In the 14 months between my divorce and the purchase of Belhaven, I said, my parents provided you with financial support totaling $112,000. I have an accounting of that here as well, prepared from records provided to me by a family member who kept them. I did not name Aunt Cecily. I did not look at her. I did not need to. A sound from my mother, layered and complicated. My father said, quietly and without accusation, that's private. Yes, I said, it was private, which is exactly how it was able to happen without my knowledge, while I was being told there was nothing to offer me because the business was struggling. My father's thumb found his watch. He pressed it and left it there. I am not telling you this because I want the money, I said. I want to be clear about that. I do not want anything from you financially. I am telling you because for 38 years I have operated in this family on the understanding that my competence meant I did not require the same consideration that was extended to Renata. And for 38 years I accepted that, because I thought it was simply how families work when one child is more capable than the other. What I did not understand until 2 years ago was that the competence being taxed was not just my time and my labor and my emotional bandwidth. It was being taxed in ways that had real financial and legal consequences for my life. The table was completely still. 40 people who had been eating and talking and celebrating 35 years of a marriage were now entirely motionless in the way of a crowd that has understood collectively that they are witnessing something that will be talked about for a long time. Renata spoke. Her voice had lost its edge. What replaced it was something more uncertain, something she was working to keep controlled. You are standing up at our parents' anniversary dinner, she said, to humiliate me. I am standing up at our parents' anniversary dinner, I said, to tell the truth. There is a difference. You had 2 years to say any of this. I had 2 years of being told I didn't know the full picture. I kept my voice level. I had 2 years of being told you were going through something difficult. I had 2 years of family dinners where you talked about Belhaven like it was your future, while I was sitting at the table knowing what I had already done. I chose those 2 years deliberately, Renata. Every dinner I attended, every phone call I returned, every time I said that sounds exciting when you mentioned that property, those were choices I made because I wanted this conversation to happen here with everyone present when the facts were completely documented and entirely undeniable. She stared at me. I own the deed to her dream, I said, and my voice did not rise, but it carried in the way that things carry when they are stated with complete certainty, for 7 weeks before tonight. 7 weeks during which I sat at a dinner table in this family and said nothing, and none of you noticed, because it has never occurred to anyone in this room that I might be operating with information you don't have. Nobody spoke. For a long moment that had real weight to it, physical weight, the kind you feel in the chest and behind the eyes, nobody in that room produced a sound. Georgette Tran had set her fork down. My cousin Alara had her hand pressed flat against the table. One of my father's business associates, a man I did not know well enough to read, was looking at the middle distance with the expression of someone who has arrived at a party that turned out to be a legal proceeding. An elderly aunt, my father's cousin, a woman named Miriam who was 81 and had never in my memory been at a loss for words, had her hand over her mouth. Aunt Cecily looked at the centerpiece. My father said in a voice I had not heard from him since childhood when he used to come into my room after bad dreams, "Lorna, just my name." I looked at him. His eyes were wet. Not crying, not yet, but close to it, and close in a way that a man like Gino Castle, who did not produce that expression readily, would not be producing without genuine cause. "Dad," I said softly, "I love you. I want you to know that none of this is about stopping loving you." He looked down. My mother, at the end of the table, did something I had not seen her do in perhaps a decade. She put both of her hands over her face, not dramatically, quietly, like someone turning out a light. Renata looked at Daniel. This time he did look back at her. And the look that passed between them was not the look of two people who had found each other. It was the look of two people who had built something together in the debris of someone else's life and were now, in the sudden illumination of a 100-watt moment, seeing the structure they had built with complete clarity for the first time. Daniel stood up. He did not say anything. He put his napkin on the table and he walked toward the exit of the private dining room, and he did not look at me as he passed. I watched him go. I felt nothing complicated about it. I had felt everything complicated about Daniel Ferris over the course of 18 months, and I had filed all of it away, the same way I filed everything, and what remained now was simply the fact of his departure, which was exactly appropriate and exactly what I had anticipated. Renata looked at the space where Daniel had been. Then she looked at the table. Then slowly she looked at me. "What do you want?" she asked. Her voice was very quiet. The performance was entirely gone from it. What was left was something raw and unadorned that I recognized, with a complicated feeling, as the closest thing to real that I had ever heard from my sister. "I don't want anything from you," I said. "I stopped wanting things from you when I understood that wanting things from you meant waiting for them in the wrong direction. I bought Belhaven because I could. I structured the leases the way I did because that was my legal right as the property owner. I'm telling you this in front of our family because the alternative was continuing to sit at these dinners watching you describe your future on a property where I hold the deed, and that was not a situation I was willing to maintain indefinitely." She looked at me for a long time. "You really spent 14 months building this," she said, not accusing, almost wondering, as if she were encountering a version of me that she had never been required to account for. "14 months," I confirmed. Give or take, something moved across her face that I could not entirely read. It was complicated in the way that genuine human emotion is complicated, not a single thing, not clean. She touched her pendant, finally, wrapping 2 fingers around the disc, holding it. Her signature gesture, the one I had cataloged over 35 years. She was cornered and she knew it, and that knowledge had stripped away everything she used to manage a room, and what remained was a woman who had made very specific choices over a very long period and was now sitting in the full, unfiltered consequence of them. "The leases can't be broken," she said. It was not a question. "They cannot," I said. 5 years. For the longest ones, yes." She released the pendant. Her hand dropped to the table. "So that's it. The leases stand," I said. "What happens after 5 years is not something I can control, but the next 5 years at Belhaven belong to other people. That is what it is." Renata nodded, a small, slow nod, the nod of someone absorbing a fact rather than accepting it, because acceptance would come later or not at all, and the absorbing was all that was available right now. My mother removed her hands from her face. Her eyes were red. She looked at me with an expression I had genuinely never seen from her. Not anger, not the managing warmth she deployed at family gatherings, not the particular quality of attention she reserved for Renata. Something more honest than any of those. "Something more tired. I should have told you," she said. Her voice was low enough that only the people near her could hear, but the table was so quiet that it carried. I looked at her for a moment. "Yes," I said, "you should have. I thought," she stopped, pressed her lips together. "I thought it would resolve itself. I thought if I gave her enough support she would settle and it would resolve and you would be fine because you are always fine," I said. She flinched slightly. A barely visible recoil, like someone who has heard a word used against them with precision. "Yes, I know," I said. "I know that's what you thought. I need you to understand that I being fine was never a reason to ask nothing of me and give everything to her. That is a thing I need you to understand, Mom, not to punish you, because it is true and because I have been waiting 38 years for you to hear it." My mother's eyes did not leave my face. She was seeing me, I thought. Perhaps for the first time in a long time, she was actually seeing me, not the Lorna who managed things and did not require attention, not the capable daughter who had always been fine. Me. Lorna Castle, who had built a company's revenue from the ground up and bought a $745,000 property and executed a lease structure of quiet, precise, irresistible consequence, and who had done all of it while sitting at this family's dinner tables and passing the bread and asking politely about everyone's week. My father had not moved. He was still looking down. His thumb was no longer on his watch. Both his hands were flat on the table, and he was breathing carefully, the way people breathe when they are trying very hard not to allow what they are feeling to become something louder than they can control. I had not often seen my father emotional in that way. It moved something in me that I was not prepared for even now. Dad, I said. He looked up. I'm not trying to blow up this family, I said. I am trying to exist in it honestly. That is all I have ever wanted. I just needed everything to be said once clearly with everyone in the room. He nodded. It was a complicated nod, the nod of a man who understood more than he could currently articulate and was going to need time to find words for it. Okay, he said, just that. I closed my folder. I put it back in my bag. I did not put it away dramatically. I just put it away, the way you put something away when you are done with it and do not need to keep it out for effect. I picked up my wine glass. Happy anniversary, I said to both of them. 35 years is genuinely remarkable, and I mean that. A sound came from somewhere at the table. Not laughter, not quite. Something on the edge of it, the involuntary sound of tension finding an unexpected release valve. My cousin Alara made it, and she covered her mouth immediately when she did, and then she caught my eye and something passed between us, quick and warm. Renata had not moved from her chair. She was sitting with both hands in her lap, looking at the table. For the first time in my entire life, my sister was the person at the family table who did not know what to do with herself, who had no performance available, no frame to stand in, no audience to manage. She was simply sitting there in the consequence of everything she had chosen, and it was, I want to be honest about this, not satisfying in the way I had sometimes imagined it would be. It was quieter than that, more human than that. She was not a villain in that moment. She was a person who had done genuinely harmful things and was sitting in the full view of them, without shelter, and whatever complicated thing lived between us, the 35 years of sisterhood beneath everything that had happened was present in that too. I did not say anything else to her that night. I did not need to. What happened after that dinner moved in the particular way that consequences move when they have been precisely aimed, steadily and without haste, and with the quality of things that were always going to arrive. In the 3 weeks following the anniversary dinner, several conversations happened that I was not party to, but was informed of afterward. My father had a long, private conversation with Renata about the money, the $112,000, and the line of credit he had borrowed against the business to provide it. He told her, according to Aunt Cecily, that he could not continue that arrangement and that he was sorry he had structured the family's support so unequally for so long. Renata did not receive this well in the immediate term. The two of them did not speak for 6 weeks after that conversation, a silence that my mother found very difficult and that my father maintained with a quiet stubbornness that I had not, until that point, known he was capable of. My mother called me 10 days after the dinner. Not to relitigate it, I had been prepared for that call, and it was not that call. She called to ask if she could take me to lunch, just the two of us. I said yes. We went to a place she liked, a small Italian restaurant near her house, and we sat for 2.5 hours and had a conversation that was, by the standards of our relationship, extraordinarily honest. She told me things she had never told me about her own childhood, about her own mother's hierarchy of affection, about the way she had absorbed a template of parenting that she had reproduced without examining. She did not use these things as excuses. She named them as explanations, which is different, and she named them in the same breath as a genuine accounting of what they had cost me. I listened. I did not perform forgiveness I had not yet reached, but I did not perform hardness either. I told her what I needed from her going forward, specifically and without softening, and she listened to that the way she had not listened to me in a very long time. It was not a repair, not entirely, not yet, but it was a beginning of something that felt like it might become one if we both tended it. Daniel and Renata's relationship did not survive the month after the anniversary dinner. I do not have clean intelligence on why. I did not seek it, because I had released Daniel from my interior accounting some time ago, and his romantic life was no longer information I needed. What I know is that by 6 weeks after the dinner, they were no longer living together, and by 2 months after that, Daniel had accepted a position with a company in another city and relocated. He sent me a brief, formal email that I read once and filed in a folder I have not opened since. Renata's career in the high-end wedding space contracted in the year following Belhaven's change of ownership in ways that were partly attributable to the closed venue and partly attributable to the simple arithmetic of a professional reputation operating in a small community where the truth about one's personal choices tends to move through informal channels faster than social media can manage. She did not disappear. She pivoted to a different segment of the market, smaller events, different price points, and she continued to work. I know this because we live in the same city and people talk, and the information reaches me without my seeking it. She's not ruined. She is reduced, which is a different thing and in some ways a more accurate consequence. I want to say one more thing about that because I think it matters. I did not buy Belhaven to ruin Renata. I bought it to reclaim something, not the venue itself, which I had no personal attachment to, but the act of it. The act of standing in the gap between what my family had been willing to let be done to me and what I was actually capable of doing on my own behalf. The leases were not cruelty. They were a demonstration that I had been paying attention for 35 years, and that attention had accumulated into something my family had fundamentally miscalculated. I did not take pleasure in watching my sister sit at that dinner table without a performance available. What I took was something more like relief, the specific, deep relief of a thing finally and completely named. Belhaven Estate, under Hadley Group's management, has now hosted 47 events in its first year of operation. The property's deferred maintenance was addressed fully in the first 6 months, the glass pavilion's structural work completed in early spring, the irrigation system in the formal garden upgraded in summer. The south wall's espaliered apple trees bloomed twice in the first year under new ownership, and both times the photographs were extraordinary. I have been to the property twice in a professional capacity, once for a site inspection with Hadley Group, once for a small corporate gathering that one of my major clients booked there through the Hadley Channel, and both times I walked through those formal gardens and looked at the glass pavilion at the light it catches and understood exactly what Renata had been talking about all those years. It is as beautiful as she always said it was. I hold the deed. I will hold it for as long as it serves me. That is all it ever needed to be. Today, I am 38 years old, running the corporate events division I built over the last 3 years as an independent firm, Castle Group Events, which I registered with Claudia's assistance in the 17th month after my wedding and which has grown in its first 2 years to 12 full-time staff, a client roster that includes 4 Fortune 500 companies, and an annual revenue that I will tell you is sufficient and leave it at that because what the number is matters less than what it represents. A thing I built with no family money, no inherited network, and no one's belief except Felicity's and Aunt Cecily's, and eventually my own. I live in an apartment I own outright, on the 7th floor of a building with windows that face east, and in the mornings when I drink my coffee and look at the city, I think about the version of myself who sat at a wedding reception for 3 hours smiling at the ruins of a life, and I feel something for her that is not quite tenderness and not quite pride, but is some combination of both. She was already building. She just did not know the blueprint yet. Aunt Cecily and I have dinner every 3 weeks. I am paying her back on the loan schedule we agreed to, and she protests every time I bring it up, and I bring it up every time because the accounting matters to me, and because keeping the accounting clean is how I keep the relationship clean. She has opinions about Belhaven's garden design that she shares freely, and I listen to all of them. My parents and I are, as I said, in the early stages of something new. It is not easy and it is not fast, and I do not expect it to be either of those things. My father is restructuring the business with the help of a consultant I connected him with, and the prognosis is cautiously reasonable. My mother and I have lunch once a month. We are both being careful with each other in a way that could become real care if we let it. I think we might let it. My sister and I have not spoken since the anniversary dinner. I do not know if we will. That answer is not mine alone to find, and I am not in a hurry to find it. What I know is this: I am the author of my own life now. Not because everything is good. Life is not a document you can draft and redraft until it is entirely right. But because when I look at the decisions I have made in the last 2 years, every single one of them was mine, made with full information, full intention, and a clear understanding of what I was trading and what I was building in return. That is all dignity is, finally, not the absence of hard things, but the presence of agency in the face of them. If you have been carrying someone else's story about you, if there are people in your life who have decided what you are worth and built their choices around a valuation you never agreed to, I want you to know that the accounting can be corrected. It takes time and it takes documentation and it takes the particular willingness to be quiet when every instinct wants you to be loud, but it can be done. I am living proof of that. Hit that like button if this story stayed with you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And leave a comment below. I want to know, did I go too far? Because I have heard that argument and I am genuinely interested in what you think. Drop your city while you're at it. You have no idea how much it means to know where in the world you are watching from.